bugs in the veggie garden in April and May. Next slide. Fungusgnats. These guys showed up as soon as I brought plants in and as soon as I planted plants in the greenhouse. So they're tiny flying insects. You see them around potted plants that have been kept too moist. The larvae, everybody thinks they're harmless. They're not completely harmless because the larvae can feed on the plant roots and that can affect growth. And they have a whopping 17-day life cycle, so they move quick. So as pictured, there's an adult stuck to the yellow sticky trap. You use those to monitor, you put them up preemptively to see if they start showing up, because if you treat them before they get bad, it's much easier. And then you can monitor when they're gone because there won't be any more on the sticky traps. So there are 2 biological controls available for home use. Bacillus thuringiensis israelensis, which is found in mosquito bits. And it's really easy. You just put them, sprinkle 1 or 2 on the soil and water them in, or better yet, with the water that you use to water the plants, just put some mosquito bits in the water itself, let them sit for a couple of hours, and you deliver the Bacillus thuringiensis to it, and it's done. It kills the larvae. It's great. And then Steinorema feltiae, which is a beneficial nematode. Next slide, please. Okay, slugs. I talk about these now because young plants are really susceptible. They like young foliage. They tend to hide under leaf litter and paving stones, or even around the edge of your raised bed. They need a damp surface to travel effectively, so they're out more at night when the dew point is there, or rainy days. You need to treat both in the spring and the fall, because you want to treat in the fall at the very end to knock down the population before the overwintering occurs. And then, of course, whenever there's damage present. And you want to put the bait out right before you put your seedlings out, or the seeds, to reduce the population so they don't immediately go for your new seedlings. So iron phosphate based preparations are safe for both pets and people, and it's Sluggo, and they come in these little tiny white pellets, and the dose is 4 to 8 pellets per square foot. So next slide, please. Cabbage worms, Pieris rapae. So these are those pretty little white butterflies you see early in the season flitting around. They damage broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, kale, and all of the greens. What they do is they fly around, lay their eggs, and within 2 weeks, these tiny 1.5-inch green caterpillars, as pictured on that leaf right there, spring out. And in one evening, they can wipe out a plant completely. They're super voracious. So the biological control for them is Bacillus thuringiensis kiristaki, or azowie, applied to early instar larvae. So it's good to get those down ahead of time. Monterey makes a nice spray that you can spray the plant with that's organic, and it'll get them before they start doing damage. The other option is floating row covers, can help prevent the little white butterflies from reaching your crop and laying eggs. So next slide. Cucumber beetles. You have both the striped and the spotted. They're both pictured in the picture below. I won't even try to pronounce those. So they go after all cucurbits and squash as host plants. The most damaging thing to the plant itself is that they transmit bacterial wilt, which is Erwinia tracheophilia, which destroys the seedlings, and it damages root. Oh, and they destroy seedlings, damage the roots, foliage, and flowers by feeding. So they go after the plant as food source, and they bring this terrible bacterial wilt. So again, with these guys, you can use the yellow sticky traps. They like those, so you can monitor the population. You definitely want to use row covers from planting until bloom. And you have the choice to uncover, hand pollinate everything, And on a side note, cucumbers need to be pollinated by 14 different bees with different pollen. So you need to hand pollinate every morning when the flowers are open. And you can leave the row covers on all season, or you can uncover them when it's bloom time and then recover them when the blooms disappear. So if you're going to use one of the registered insecticides, it should not be used during blooming because it will definitely affect the bees. And next slide. And here are my resources. They're all EDU sites. Just take a picture of this if you'd like to see them and look them up. And that's it from me. So Laura, are there any questions in the chat box?
Not at this time.
Okay. So, all right, next slide. So here's our neighbor to neighbor chat. We'll be focusing on specific bugs in your garden. And at the end of each presentation, we will take a minute for questions. Pat, I'll turn this over to you.
All right, thank you for having me. My name is Pat Henley. I'm a Green Spring Master Gardener. And here is a glam shot of mason bees. And the mason bees are out right now. April is mason bee month when they first come out. They're actually very small, but you can see they're shiny, they're hairy, they're kind of cute. They're not aggressive. They're not going to bother you too much. Next slide, please. And so they're small. They're only between like 0.2 to 0.8 inches. There's a reason why they're called orchard bees, because they like trees, flowering trees, fruit trees and such. Next slide, please. Okay, here's a few facts. There's about 20 different mason bee species. Oh, by the way, their genus is Osmia in the mid-Atlantic region. They're active right now in mid-April to mid-June. The adults die off after nesting season, unfortunately. There's only one generation. They're named from their habit of making compartments of mud in their nests. They're very efficient pollinators because they like to come out when it's cooler in the morning. They don't mind flying around in the rain. And they're very speedy. They're much speedier than honeybees. And they're hairy, if you saw in that first picture, so that the pollen is more easily transferred from flower to flower when they run around. They nest in hollow reeds or the holes in woods. They prefer dead trees or branches, but we're talking to Becky earlier and she said she has them nesting in an old greenhouse bookcase or something like that. They do not drill holes. Those are the carpenter bees. So they will look for things that are already existing. And they're solitary. They don't live in hives, but as small little families. So next slide, please. All right, so right now in April, the males come out first, and then the females come out a few days later, and then they immediately mate. And then the females are the ones that are running around pollinating. And so right now the females are looking for nesting sites, and they're gathering pollen and nectar for provisions for their eggs. So the females lay their eggs in the hollow tunnel or the holes, 1 egg per cell. They tuck in a little pea-size ball of pollen and nectar, and they seal it off with mud. And this is very efficient of them. The eggs towards the back are female, the eggs in the front are male, and the males hatch out first, so it kind of makes sense. And the eggs hatch into larvae. They have that little pollen ball in there, and they develop into cocoon adults and then remain dormant from summer until next spring, you know, all within their little cells. So next slide, please. So keeping them in your garden. She mentioned earlier, Jen had mentioned pesticides. Please, if you can avoid it, do not use pesticides in your garden. It's very, or things like that. It's very bad for the bees. So if possible in your landscape, if you have snags or dead wood, leave them there. The bees are coming out now in the spring, so don't clear them away in the winter, disturb their nests in the winter or early spring cleanup. If you don't have that kind of situation where you've got like snags and dead wood around, you can buy or build bee boxes or bundles, and I'm sure you've seen them for sale. And I do have some information about them in the next, at the last slide. and you site it near food. They only travel about 300 feet from nest to forage. So in the next slide, you can see what they like. They're generalists. So try for a good variety of native trees and shrubs and flowers. So right now, the plants that are blooming through April through mid-June. So things that you see are wonderful pollinator plants or great bee plants that are blooming in July. I'm sorry, the mason bees are gone. It'll still be great for the bees that are here, but not for the mason bees. So right now what's blooming are like your native willows, your maples, red buds, wild cherries, wild plums, apple and crab trees, other fruit trees. They're such efficient pollinators that a lot of commercial growers that have like grow apples or almonds are using them instead of honeybees. Berry shrubs, blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, strawberries. I have some aronia berries in my yard right now, and they are visiting that right now. And they're like plants in the rose and legume family, clover, vetches, things like that. And next slide, please. They like things that are white, yellow, blue. They don't see red. And pretty much what's blooming right now are things that are white, yellow, and blue, or in the blue purplish family. They like things that smell good and they're open in the daytime. And like most bees, they like a little landing platform. They don't want to hover like a little, like a butterfly or a hummingbird. They also like them that are tubular with nectar at the base. And in the next slide, you can see a few of what they like. Of course, these are native bees, so you try to do native plants wherever possible, native shrubs, native flowers, penstemons, mountain mint, which is a wonderful pollinator plant that blooms a little later in the season, but you can get the tail end of the mason bees. And if you plant that, you will get all kinds of wonderful bugs and pollinators that will come to that. Wild indigo, that's coming up in my yard right now, and it will be blooming probably in the next couple of weeks, so that'll be great for them. Catnip, which is not native, they like that. Salvias, annual and perennials. And if you're looking for sources of native plants, go to www.plantvirginianatives.org. And they have sources of like Earth Sangha, Nature by Design, and some other regular nurseries. Also, Green Spring Gardens has a plant store there. Right now, you have to go online, order your plants online, and they have curbside pickup. Maybe later in the season, it'll be open, but right now it's curbside pickup. And for suggested resources, the next slide, please. I work at the Martha Washington branch of the Fairfax County Libraries. And so I always say, please come and look at our books. These two great books that are in the library, Attracting Native Pollinators by the Xerces Society, wonderful book. And also The Bees in Your Backyard. They also have a great Facebook page. And if you want to, if you don't have the proper habitat for mason bees and you want to build something that will attract bees to your garden, there is a wonderful site from Michigan State University about building bee hotels. They will tell you how to build it, how to site it, and how to maintain bee boxes from year to year and keep it safe. So thank you, and I hope you have mason bees in your yard. And I will pass it on to the next. Oh, there
Lord,
yeah.
did Pat have any questions in the chat box?
No questions.
Okay, I see them coming out. Isn't that cute?
Okay, Carol, tell us about bad bugs to look for in your garden.
Okay, so thank you everyone for attending our session. And there are so many bugs in the garden right now that we're just going to get started. And I hope some of what I'll say you can apply to other bugs. So I thought I would start right at the beginning with the aphids, because these are tiny, the little immature aphids, the nymphs, look a lot like the parents. They're pear-shaped, they're 2 to 4 millimeters, and they can range in color from green to black, red, yellow, brown. Some of them have wings and others don't, but the way to know it's an aphid for sure is to look for the 2 tailpipes. So you can see the little arrow here. That's called a cornicles, and they extend from the back of the abdomen. And so all aphids have these little tailpipes, and so you can tell that it truly is an aphid. Next, please. So aphids are found all over the garden. They're really common, most plants. This is on a rose, and but they can be on cotton, on melons, apples, roses, almost anything. And they kind of cluster in this kind of pattern. So when they are in your garden, they are actually using sucking kind of from the tender green parts of the plant. They use these tailpipes, feed on the underside of leaves and in large clusters, and they can be on the youngest of leaves, and so you can see them quite often. Generally, aphids don't cause extensive damage to plants unless you have a very big problem with them. And the next slide, please. And if you have problems with aphids because they feed on the sap of the plant, they can cause twisted and curled leaves, yellowed foliage, stunted and dead shoots, or poor plant growth. And most of the time you don't really see them, but when, again, they're in their cluster where they gather and they feed, there's usually quite a number of them together. So building off what Pat and Jen have said, next slide, please. You can protect from aphids in a number of ways. And the first one is to remove the weeds and to not fertilize so readily in your garden. So because they're growing, the aphids are actually feeding on the green leafy parts. The less fertilizer you use, the fewer weeds that you use, the less they'll actually have to eat and to cluster. And so that's kind of one cultural way to get rid of aphids. Another one, which I thought was quite clever, was to use, they used the mylar from the balloons and put that in the garden. They said that the mylar film, when placed on the soil surface, actually reflects the sunlight, and that can increase your plant yield, but the actual aphids don't like it very much. You don't want to buy big rolls of mylar all over the place, but a small amount of kind of a silver coated thing, an aluminum pie pan they suggest, which you can cut and place upside down at the base of a plant, is really helpful for getting rid of some of the aphids, unless you have a large infestation. They also suggest you can just spray them off with water, and high pressure spray means high kind of water hose pressure spray, not the pressure wash that you might use on the side of your house. Once they fall onto the ground, the aphids can't jump back onto the plant, and they often die. And then another type of control is to actually allow other bugs in your garden to feed on the aphids themselves. And so what I'm showing here in the upper left is the larvae from a lady beetle, and the lady beetle, the mature one, is on the right. These love to eat the little aphids, and so if you see either one of those, that's a good sign that your aphid problem may soon go away of its own. The other type of insect that loves to eat the aphids is the green lacewing larva, and you can actually buy those in the store, the larva. They'll turn into, from the figure at the bottom left to the middle of the bottom row, that's the green lacewing adult, and they eat, large quantities of aphids as well. There's also, if you look carefully at your aphids and you see that you get what they call an aphid mummy, which is on the bottom right, that means that a parasite, this braconid wasp, has gotten inside an aphid and laid its egg, and it'll hatch out another wasp, but the aphid itself becomes a little mummy. And so if you can see structures like that, you should kind of leave the aphids alone and let the kind of nature take its course and help reduce the numbers of the aphids. You can also try to use some pesticides and insecticides. Pyrethrins are a favorite. They're actually derived from chrysanthemums and cause little damage to other, either other insects or other plants in the garden. Also, often people also use neem oil and other materials like that, soaps and oils, so that the aphids can't stick to your plants. Next slide, please. And since we're talking about lady beetles, this is one particular type, the Asian lady beetles. We used to call them ladybugs, but this is a bigger size lady beetle. It ranges in color, orange, red, yellow. They all have 19 black spots, and the Asian lady beetle has an M, you can see on its kind of just behind its neck. Next slide, please. These are great. Asian lady beetles, they are wonderful for feeding on aphids first, but you don't want them to get too carried away, because by the time the aphids kind of die away in your garden and you start ripening up your fruit, grapes, apples, raspberries in the fall, those lady beetles love to attack any wounds you have in the fruit, cluster there, and they become the pest. So what was the way to get rid of pests, the aphids, becomes a new pest in your garden. And interesting, the lady beetles actually prefer to winter over in cliffs or in sunny sides of tall buildings. So if you have an infestation of the Asian lady beetles, you can actually get them into your house over the winter. Next slide, please. And while the lady beetles themselves are more a nuisance than any kind of a stinging insect, they do leave stains and a really bad acrid odor in your house. They don't actually transmit disease, but a lot of people have allergies to them. And so again, just to show you the kind of the marvels of nature, you know, what was kind of our hero in the first part of the summer becomes perhaps a pest in our winter. And the last slide, please. Yeah, thank you. And the Master Gardeners have, you know, huge sessions on the spotted lanternfly, but this is a new kind of pest that's coming into this area. If you see any, please let us know. They are causing millions of dollars of damage because they're feeding on some of the biggest crops that we have in Pennsylvania and Virginia, the black walnut, the birch, the willow, and grapes. And so while I won't talk much about these, I just thought the array of colors and structures of the spotted lanternfly was fairly amazing. And if you're interested in knowing more, please see another one of the Master Gardener sessions. So I thank you for your time. And here are the references again. The cooperative extensions or the .edus are kind of the best sites for information. And I recommend any of these. And next slide, please. Okay.
So no questions, but that was a great presentation.
So good. If there are no questions, I actually have a question on kind of the bees. Can you tell us how many bees there might be in this area?
Let's see, in the, let's see, there's about 20 different mason bees in this area. And there's like 4,000 species of native bees in the United States and about 430 species of native bees in Virginia.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it is. And you know, we're all in love with the honeybees, I guess, because they give us honey and they're cute and we all know about them and we've all been raised by Winnie the Pooh and things like that. But the native bees are wonderful. And so, and they are from the beginning now on through the end of the season, end of, you know, the summer. So you do need to plant for all of the bees.
Oh,
I think one of the messages that I heard really getting out this winter, and I don't know, you know, it's interesting, but is not to clean up your garden
Yes.
at the end of the winter season, because it's so many pests, or not pests, but so many pollinators, so many beneficials do overwinter in the debris. And so you really want to wait until you've had like a series of 65-degree or whatever the temperature was days to allow them to wake up and kind of, you know, move on from those places that they've been hiding and overwintering. You know, and I definitely heard that through Master Gardener classes, but then my next door neighbor who's not involved in the Master Gardeners is like, it's been 65 for this many days, I can finally clean up my plant debris. And so somehow it's getting out to the world. I think that's really interesting and wonderful.
that's amazing. So I always thought that the bees were kind of in structures, in trees and hives. And I was really amazed to find out that most of them are in your grass, kind of somewhere in the ground.
The ground, there are ground dwelling bees.
Mhm.
And if you want to know more about native bees, I strongly suggest you go, you know, you Google Sam Droege, because he is local and he just knows everything there is to know about native bees around here. He has fabulous photos of them, which anyone can use. He also has all kinds of great videos out there on YouTube and such. And also the Smithsonian has some really good things on native bees. I have not been to the Smithsonian Garden since before the pandemic, but I know in the Ripley Garden, they had done a very nice bee house with you know, different you know, bamboo reeds in them and things like that for native bees to nest in. And it was very attractive.
I know
Yeah.
for us, we had a late brood of swallowtails on my fennel that I knew like these were not going to be ones that like migrated from here or whatever. So I don't know actually with swallowtails. I know that the monarchs migrate, but I think the swallowtails do have chrysalises that overwinter and then come back. And so I made a point to leave that area of my garden. I haven't seen any yet. I'm a little bit disappointed, but it's amazing how many different beneficials do actually overwinter.
Yes, and I am told, please do not go wild with leaf blowers.
Indeed, indeed. The last fall, I think I've seen the biggest praying mantis ever. I don't know. I don't know if there's bigger bugs in the garden, but this had to be 6 inches right at the end of the fall, and I lost track of them. So I hope they made it wherever they were going.
Have you seen any of the egg sacs in your bushes or anything like that?
You know, I'm not sure I would know what they look like. I would
They're
have to go.
papery little globes, you know. And
They
so
almost look like sort of brown styrofoam.
Really?
Makes sense. They're not, it's not really big, a couple inches.
yeah,
Really cool because when they hatch out, the immature, the little ones look just like the big ones, only they're tiny. They're really cute.
Cool. Well, I hope I didn't clean them up. So now I'm gonna look for them really hard. But
I have them on my rosemary, which is also a great bee plant, by the way, which is not native, but bees do like it. And my rosemary kind of blooms almost all year long. It's very happy in my yard.
that's fantastic. Okay, well, it looks like that's about all the questions for this evening.
I actually have a question about the bees. When is somebody mentioned to me that you don't want to get the houses that are mass produced because you want to be able to clean them? Do you know when is the best time to clean them out?
Well, it kind of depends. And I would defer to that University of Michigan site that I told you when they talk about maintenance and such, because right now those bees are going to be they're in there and they're not going to be hatching out for a while. So maybe like in, you know, I'm really not quite sure how you would do that. What I hear about the ones that are commercially done is that they are hard to clean. And some of these other ones, you can take them out and clean them, and you can remove like the mason bees are in little cocoons. And some people actually remove those little cocoons and put it in a little box and overwinter them in their shed or something like that. And they will hatch out in this little box, because you can buy mason bees as cocoons. And so that site that I suggest tells you how to maintain your houses.
Cool.
Thank you.
The mason bees come out first, but then later on in the year, you'll get the leaf cutter bees that come out later in the season. And they also build little nests with, you know, with the little leaves that they chomp off of probably your red bud. They love red buds.